But anyway, in the end, basically the Italians started taunting the Finns. And so in the end, the Finns said, okay, we'll be there. Well, the next morning rolls around, and Mr. Lewis is going out to the bus that's come by to pick up everybody and take them to the trailhead because they're going to hike this famous mountain nearby. And it's pouring rain as he walks across the park. Oh, my gosh. And he gets on the bus, and the first thing he sees is several rows full of the Japanese. And they're reading newspapers, they're talking to one another, they're looking out the window, but everything's pretty much even Steven. No problem, they're there. Now, behind the Japanese were several rows of the most sour-faced people you could ever imagine. Well, guess who it was? It was the Finns. But by golly, they were there. They committed, they said they were going to be there, and they were. Now, behind the Finns were several more rows. And guess who was in them? Nobody. The Italians didn't show. So the long story is, they went and had their hike. They came back about noon. They were all wet, cold, and miserable. And as they get back to the resort, the leader of the Finns goes stomping in across the room. He finds the leader of the Italians, and they're all sitting around the fireplace playing backgammon and sipping on cappuccinos. And he says, "Where were you? We did our part. We showed up." And the leader of the Italian just looked at him with this incredulous look and said, "Are you crazy? It was raining outside." We see the point of that. And your reaction was kind of like mine when I first heard it, which is it's not really a joke, right? It kind of reveals volumes about how other people communicate and what they mean. But more important than that, I want you to think for a minute. Think for a minute. Think about the assumptions or generalizations that might have been going through your mind when we talk about these people. What's the logical conclusion we might draw from the Japanese? That basically they're complacent, they're pushovers, they don't really have an opinion? I got to tell you, folks, they're some of the world's fiercest negotiators. Be careful of generalizations. How about the Finns? They're very boring, they're very predictable, they're very grumpy. Hey, I had a business partner from Finland who was one of the rowdiest, funniest, and loudest people you ever meet. Be careful of generalizations. I've worked with Italians who are some of the most trustworthy and integrous people you could ever meet. See, the problem with generalizations and assumptions, you may have heard the old saying about assuming. And what assuming stands for is ASSU, me. The only time that generalizations tend to work is when we might be doing mass marketing. So that's part of a problem. The second lesson learned from the Global Office is the idea that if it can go wrong, it will go wrong. Only bigger and badder. When I was in the natural foods industry, we were doing a large product launch. We had the first one of these oat-based non-dairy products that came into the market. We had Whole Foods and Wild Oats and all these big retailers lined up. We had chefs, we had advertising. We had the best distributors, the best brokers in the industry working for us. We had this giant product launch planned. Well, the product was coming from Sweden. And about 2 weeks before all the product was supposed to be in the warehouses of our distributors and getting out to the stores, we get a call from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. We have 8 shipping containers, these big 40-foot containers of this product sitting in 8 different ports scattered around the U.S., and they were being held up. Why? Because it's an agricultural product, and there was something wrong with the form that was filled out by the quality control engineer in Sweden. What was it? Well, a recording that should have been done in Fahrenheit was done in Celsius. No big deal, right? Send an email, make a call? It took us 3 months of wrangling with the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the Swedes to work that out. And by that time, the window passed. We did eventually bring our product to market, but we lost a lot of valuable ground. So that's part of the problem. When you deal with international business, things go wrong in ways you can't even imagine. Another lesson learned, yes means maybe. Anybody who's ever dealt with the Asians can probably understand with the nodding head syndrome that oftentimes if you let it go long enough, it will start going horizontally, which means, no, I don't really get it. In that case, yes means I hear you. It doesn't mean I understand or agree with you. And in Latin cultures, oftentimes the term mañana, they know what it means. It means later. It literally does not mean tomorrow in that context. We need to understand that. The fourth point, this is a biggie, this idea that perception is reality. There's a famous fable, a myth in India, It's the story of the blind men and the elephant. Some of you may have heard of that. I'll tell you the very condensed version of the blind men and the elephant. A bunch of blind men walking down a dusty road, boom, they bump into an elephant. Now, depending on which part of that they touch, whether it's a trunk or a tusk or a tail or an ear, they all proceed to define the elephant in different ways. That becomes the reality because they've got blinders on, where in fact they actually have a very limited, or in this case, no perception. The point is, in international business, we're all like the blind men and the elephant. And the more we're aware of that, the more it can give us pause to ask the right questions and maybe do more research. Different goals, different standards. Some companies and some cultures may be, you may desire in your marketing initiative or your product launch to maximize your profits. Somebody else may be trying to maximize market share. Somebody else may be just trying to win enough business to keep their employees happy. Somebody may actually be going out there and purposefully losing money, what's called a loss leader, right? Because they want to gain access to a whole new geographical area or a whole new industry. So be careful about the assumptions. And there's a whole bunch of other things that we can talk about later. That the list just it goes on and on about ways that the dangers of cross-cultural business. Finally, we got a challenge in this country. I'm kind of shifting gears here a little bit. In the last few years, our math scores in math and science have dropped nearly off the map compared to other industrialized countries in the world. We're 29th and 34th out of 35 countries. Pretty scary, huh? Also, I got to share a little piece of information with you. National Geographic does this really cool survey about every 3 or 4 years, and they call it their Geographic Literacy Survey. And basically, they go out and interview thousands of people. And actually, the survey was being conducted on American 18 to 24-year-olds, right? Those who were old enough to raise families, start careers, and even go off to war in places like Iraq. Well, guess what they found in this survey? 2/3 of those young people could not even find Louisiana on the map. And this survey was done right after Hurricane Katrina. Nearly 2/3 couldn't find England on a map. Half of them couldn't find New York City on a map. 10% couldn't find the U.S. on a map. Now, I didn't believe that, but if you go on National Geo's website and follow some of their, you can dig this up and find their survey was statistically valid. It was done with the Roper. They're like Gallup. They're really professional survey groups. It's amazing and it's scary. Furthermore, what else did the survey find? Well, it found that 60% of this sample group believed that the population of the U.S. was at least 750 million people. 1/3 of them believe that the population of the U.S. is greater than 2 billion people, which is like 1/3 of the planet. We're like 5% of the planet, folks. 3/4 of them believe that English is the world's most common spoken language. It's not. It's Mandarin Chinese by a mile. And nearly half believe that India is primarily Muslim, where in fact Hindus outnumber Muslims 9-1. We got any sports fans in the room? Yeah. But let me give you an analogy. From the slides we just saw, and we look at what our aggressive global competitors are up to and what our state of preparation is. Here's the analogy. You got a big game. The other team has your playbook, and you can't find your way down to the court or the field. That's a problem brewing. Well, let's take a look about what's going on and why you should care. Well, first of all, the idea is that they, both our allies and competitors, I call them the markets, the merchants, the maniacs, they know a lot more about us than we know about them. In many ways, we're the victim of our own success. America's a superpower. We have the dominant media, the dominant entertainment. As a result, we tend to be somewhat inward-looking. It's only natural.